Our opera, World War One, a village opera, almost didn't happen. It was supposed to be a music hall concert, but more on that in a minute. First of all, let me tell you about our village, because that's central to the story. The village has had many names, but in 1880 we settled on Llangwm. Pronounced, you'll notice, in the English rather than the full-blooded Welsh way, Llangwm. And we're pretty amazing, actually, and I suppose you could say, well, pretty with it, right on the edge of the Milford Haven estuary. The women who live by the water, that's one of the songs in the opera. Women here were traditionally tough as nails fisherwomen, a tradition we're trying to emulate, though without the fish, of course. I played Martha in the opera. There she is having a set-to with one of the recruiting officers. What we do have in Llangwm is a wealth of writers, musicians, artists, filmmakers. Very handy if you want to stage an opera. But whatever made us think a village of 800 people could produce an opera from scratch?
As a very active local history society, back in 2012 we were looking to see what we should do to commemorate the start of the First World War, and obviously we were looking at researching the role of the men who went off and died from Llangwm, and we looked a lot further than that to the people who stayed at home and the effect the war had on the village. But we also thought we'd like to do something a little bit different and a little bit more light-hearted. So we approached Sam Howley, who is a local musician and composer, and also directs the local Village Voices choir, and asked him if he could possibly put together a music hall type event in the village hall.
I was originally approached in 2013 by Jane Mills, who asked me to use some of my musical contacts to put on a music hall sequence, some sort of recruitment evening, just to pull people's attention towards the First World War. And before I knew what was going to come out of my mouth, I said, I'll write an opera instead, which caused a little bit of a shock.
But we did it anyway. And we put on an exhibition, bringing to life some of the stories our History Society researchers were uncovering. So we had a composer. But what about the words?
I was approached by Sam and Jane with a view to penning an opera. That means becoming the librettist. From a very early stage, I obviously wanted to involve the local community and its experience, but I also wanted to make it effectively accessible to all the other communities across the country who must have endured similar trials at that time.
The effect on the local community has been dramatic. For example, people would pop to the post office to get their loaf of bread or pint of milk, and they'd be singing the tunes from the opera. But I think the most extraordinary thing is that it's pulled together people from different social circles, and people are now socialising with people that they wouldn't ordinarily talk to.
So, words and music. But what about the story? Well, the History Society did lots of research and came up with some fascinating stories. The butter war, for example, when Llangwm women staged a boycott and succeeded in bringing down the price of butter from 1.8 to 1.4. But also the tragic story of the two brothers who were killed together on the same day of the Western Front. Peter featured both these stories in the libretto. So, it was looking good. Music, words, stories. But hang on a moment, isn't there something missing? Yes, that's it. Money. So in went our application to the Heritage Lottery Fund, and when we heard back it was good news. But when we received the amazing music and libretto, we realised we had to up our game, so we applied for additional funding to the Community Covenant. So, at last we had enough. and we made a start. The plan was to show the devastating impact of war on ordinary people in a rural community like Llangwm. But we also wanted to tell the story behind it.
What I wanted to do as well was to have an accurate picture of the history, particularly that which led up to the beginning of the First World War. One could, by doing research, see the mistakes that were being made by the politicians.
So now we must all, like the French, our enemies for centuries, to the Russians too we trust and woo ye gods, how things have changed. Needs must, when the devil's drives, we cannot stand alone. To the west and to the east to keep Kaiser Bill at home. So far at least. So it's God save the King, vive la France, long live the Tsar, long live the Triple Entente. So now we must like the French, our enemies century, Russia, till we taught and ruled us rules. God save the King, now we almost like the French, now we almost like the French, now we almost like God save the King, we almost like the now we almost like the French. God save the King, vive la France, long live the Tsar, long live the Triple Entente.
But we also showed how the war affected two young lovers, Tom and Mary, who became engaged just as war was declared.
Here we shall dwell in these fields of our freedom, the soil in our fingers, the light always changing, the tide always moving, the chant of birds from the sea.
Here we will breathe the gorse and the heather, the wind in the trees, the scent of the flowers, the salt which blows from the bay. Here we will work, tilling the land, sowing the seed, launching our bows, drawing our nets on the tide.
And at the dawning of each day,
we'll smile and watch our children play,
careless in the fields of corn, or
running in the newborn hay. At the ending of each day,
when beauty slumbers in the west,
we shall lie down and take our rest, dreaming under a star-filled sky.
This being wartime, however, love doesn't run smoothly. Tom and his brother are sent to the Western Front.
De morte eterna indi la tremenda. Libera me, Domine, libera me, Domine, de morte eterna in la tremenda.
The worst happens. The men are sent into battle. The Germans are ready for them. There are shots, a call for stretcher bearers, an explosion. Suffice to say, we rejoin Mary many years later.
I lived to a good age, and I kept the place going until I was too old to manage. I knew he would have wanted that. Here I could keep him in frozen time in my heart, and I was safe with his memory. Any other man who set his cap at me could never rival those images of him. So full of hope, promise, and carelessly going off to the war because he believed it was the right thing to do. So many years passed, so much changed, but I never let go of those memories. Most days, I would take the path down to the water, the same path that we had always taken when we were walking out together. It was there that they found me, hand outstretched, waiting for his.
Well, I do hope it achieved my wish to carry a message. That message is really, for goodness sake, let's not ever do this again. Unfortunately, it seems that we haven't learned as much as we should.